Alright, me, this is the start of the new manga review series, so I obviously need to get off on the right foot here as it sets the expectations of all future reviews for the audience. We just can't screw this up, alright? I have to pick the right one here. I could ride the search trends and talk about popular series like One Piece or Fire Force, and draw in those clicks and build my subscriber base, but I feel like that wouldn't work because that obviously didn't work when we tried to do a Secret Forces video, so. Or we could cover a complex, mature manga like Tokyo Red Hood or Yamakin Yushimakun, so I sound like I know what I'm talking about. No, people know who I am, though. They know I can't say smart things anyway. I mean, the next best thing we can do is just share Nizaki's, like I always do in Discord calls. This is hard. Yeah, I'll just ask my editor. So that's about the gist of my dilemma. What do you mean this doesn't count as my first episode? No, that episode doesn't exist. Well, fuck you too. I'll just ask Ethan instead. Genius! And that's how I ended up deciding to cover Drifters. You know, that manga about historical figures being teleported to a fantasy setting to have a massive war, providing cheap fills, while also having a lot of deep lore and design choices made to stimulate the brain of the more thoughtful reader, and also written and drawn by the guy behind the popular series Hellsing. It's like a match made in heaven. It fits everything I need to do. But why do I describe Drifters in such a way, you may be asking? Well, because that's how I experienced Drifters myself. I was drawn to it by its concept, its flashy fights, and its well-written characters. But as you think about it more, and then more times you revisit it, the more things you know about it. You notice the subtle design choices made, the implications of random sentences sprouted in the middle of story beats, and what it could all be representing. But I'm getting ahead of myself now. We need to, give you the background on this properly. This geniusly done fantasy historical Izaki manga before we can even grasp onto the topics I want to bring up. So, synopsis time. To boil the plot down to its barest bones, historical figures get moved to another world at their time of supposed deaths, where they bring their knowledge to wage war to fight other historical figures who are morally and beautifully evil, and the big bad who is even trying to hide his true identity. Like, everyone calls him the Black King, but his true identity is blatantly obvious. Like, at this point, it's an open kept secret that the Black King is Jesus. If you think that's a spoiler, it's in the anime intro! You can see the holes in his palm! For more examples of my evidence, please refer to the fact that he can duplicate grains, instantly heal the wounded, talk about how he sacrificed himself for humanity for, and this entire skit he has with Rem and Skimpy. We'll talk about the implications of making the main antagonist the son of God later, but I do want to compliment the writer on doing the Izaki genre justice. While I do enjoy reading trashy Izaki mangas, I am often frustrated by how cliche they feel. It always feels like it's doing the same power fantasy of being OP than either doing a revenge story, slow living, or manifesting fate in some way. And if you're lucky, you get a heroine while you're at it. Or if this is a manga directed to girls, you live out an O-tone plot with a reverse harem, because it's like the one plot line they can do for Izaki's directed at ladies, if it's not comedy. Like, come on, guys. Be a little more different for them. Drifters is refreshingly different, though, because instead of serving up a generic self-insult story, it presents a what-if question. What would happen if we got important historical figures who had no definitive death and put them in a fantasy setting to have a fight? The results of such a question? One of the most well-done stories to grace the genre, and but the concept alone doesn't carry it. There's many factors that contribute to its greatness. So let's talk about one of them: characters. All the characters are great and well written, and considering most of the cast is historical figures, that's an impressive feat. Like, yeah, it's easy to write a character when you are effectively just copying someone else's notes, but to make an historical character likable and unique, to an audience that may not know who they are or their historical significance is an achievement. I also like how you can tell that author has put in the effort to make sure these characters are true to themselves while also actually being entertaining characters, something that would require a lot of research to pull off effectively. I make that statement out of my ass because I am one of those people who don't know who any of these people present in the story except for a few I know by name alone, but I take confidence in that statement. For example, let's take Oda Nobunaga. Need to screw that one up. Historically, he was one of Japan's most feared warlords from the feudal era, leading his army to the near unification of Japan at the time before his death caused by the betrayal of his close aides, if my fate knowledge is correct. I also believe he was also the one that remodernized war and changed the face of war within Japan by manufacturing muskets and iron warships at the time. So he was really ahead of his time in terms of war tactics for the period he was alive. Hearing that, it's natural to presume that he would not only be a skilled person in the arts of war and politics, he would also be for himself and extremely overconfident. I mean, come on, it's like he nearly got away with unifying the world of Japan. I think he has the justification to have that sort of ego. You know, they gave him all those traits, though, but then they made him more than that. This is a version of him that is extremely humorous and is shown to actually have human moments. Most other mangas would rather say it's close to recorded history when depicting historical figures, making them fly in the progress. But Drifters not only goes out of its way to make them human, but also amusing. I don't think this manga would be as good as it is if they played it so straight with its cast, especially when one of its main selling points involves the interactions made between these characters. People would rather read a story about human beings, not a story about paper cutouts pretending to be human. Now, with all the pretentious stuff out of the way, I can fangirl about all the other characters. I know I said this before, but the characters are really well written. Like, let's take our main protagonist for example, Toyohisa. Not only he embodies the appeal of old shonen characters, which is being extremely cool, he is also, like most shonen characters, an extremely simple-minded. All he cares about is honor and nothing else. So yes, he is an idiot, but he's an admirable idiot that you want to root for because he's effectively the embodiment of a samurai. And you grow to like him more through his interactions, be it messing up everyone else's plans with his sudden actions, or beating up Oda and Yoichi for no reason. He's extremely amusing to watch, and that goes for everyone else. Like, everyone here is carried by their interactions with everyone else in the plot. For example, watching Saint Germain is a treat already, but then watching him interact with Oda for the first time, you just realize, wow, he's just more than just being a queer turncoat schemer of sorts. You know, and then another great example of this would be Hannibal, who is depicted for most of the series as an incompetent old man who's going senile, but then you see that he still has that right mind to be known as the strategical genius he is through these little moments where he inspires the other characters. And we do see more of this as we get into the latest chapters, which I'm not going to spoil because those chapters are actually really good, and unfortunately they're literally the newest chapters, so I don't want to spoil it for new readers. But yeah, I feel like I made my point clear. The characters are done well, and are amusing to both history nerds and the general reading base. Well, most of them are. There's some I don't agree with, and that's mainly with the original characters. I'm going to cut to the chase. The original characters, aka the ones not based on historical figures, aren't particularly interesting, and I can certainly understand why. The big focus of the story is the drifters, so all the non-drifters are more like set pieces, designed to help move the story, and it makes sense for most of them. The elves and the dwarves don't really need much time, since they just do their stereotypical personalities, and sprinkle some anger in because, you know, they're being mistreated for so long. But what about the Octobers? Like, what about the Merchant Nation? These are prominent in the story, and I feel like they aren't fleshed out enough. Granted, at the time of writing, our merchant friends may get more story seeing where the plot is heading, but I certainly feel like the Octobers could do with a little more backstory. I don't know much about their formation or their past contributions to the world. For an organization with a lot of influence, resources, and ties to drifters, they feel a little bare bones. They need something a little more to it, like having very little information on so important figures can work. It works for the two figures in the whole very well, but the Octobers aren't godlike figures or the Illuminati. They are effectively a militia when I think about it, an offshoot of the main Order Empire that has gone somewhat rogue in order to stop the Black King, but not exactly violent. They rather help others do the job and not do the job themselves. Really only carried by their leader and Omniboobs, who are fine characters, but I feel like they just exist to fill in the role of the straight man and have their inner thoughts used as devices to empathize certain moments. That said, I still enjoy the characters. You don't need to know history to enjoy historical characters, but being informed makes them more enjoyable to watch. The original characters are set pieces, but they are carried by the interactions with other drifters when they are allowed to be characters. The maker did an excellent job on this front overall, a praise I can extend to the story and the world itself. As expected from the author of Hellsing, they do an excellent job of making a mundane sounding setting sound interesting. Just like how the supernatural and the religious made Europe seem like a hotbed for conspiracy and terror, the concept of drifters influenced the fantasy world to be more than just, well, generic. Its biggest influence are the actions of the drifters themselves, both past and present. Talking about the impact of old drifters first, their impact is felt in how the world is structured. Take, for example, the Outer Empire. At first, it seems like a very typical fantasy empire that discriminates against other races. Soon it becomes more than that when you find out that it's only been in existence for 50 years, and the founder is, well, Hitler. I mean, sidestepping the fact that Hitler is a drifter for now, a lot of policies the Empire has make sense now. Why they have elves and dwarves effectively working in concentration camps. How influential drifters are in the world with their otherworldly knowledge to grow such a large empire and territory in 50 years. And the German influences found in both the army's ideologies and naming conventions. This is all before we add small details that can be very easily missed. For example, Saint Germain just casually dropping the fact that he's been there for centuries, despite the fact having not aged a day. The tombstone in front of the ruined castle having the names of two very interesting people no one will know without googling. Or how said ruined castle has been there for centuries, predating the knowledge among the current elven population, which is more interesting when you find out what the tombstone implies. There's a lot more I'm deliberately leaving out, but the setting is rich in lore that you can spectate and have a ball about theorizing this world and story. The second contribution to this brilliantly crafted story is what the current drifters bring to this world and how it shapes it. A big part of the story is the impact of new tactics, ideals, and technology has on a medieval world and how terrifying that is, and contributes to this overall theme presented in the story about progression. Jumping the gun here since I want to talk about the deeper meaning of the series in its own part, but I feel like there's a lot of things worth talking about here. The theme of progression is not only technological, but socially as well. A big part of the social aspect of that theme is how we see monsters coming together under the Black King to effectively become a functioning human society. While human races are infighting, splintering, and honestly acting like monsters themselves, saying they treat the other monsters, well, races. The Black King is uniting the monsters to become a united race, because to paraphrase him, mankind betrayed me once before, so I will become the monster's messiah. Which, is totally not hinting at the fact he's Jesus or anything. I mean, he has this hood obscuring his face. All we know, he might as well be actually Mel Brooks underneath there. I do want to talk about the meanings of all this, but let's just rush the visual section so I can get my rant on. Visually, it's great. I'm not a design student, so at best I can say it uses a lot of dark tones very well, and the usage of thick, rough lines fits the overall tone very well. Aesthetically, it's kind of flat. I feel like those two words mean the same thing. It's fine. I said I'm not a design student. It's fine. We can just keep going. It's a generic fantasy setting, even with the influences of drifters. It's still a very generic overall. While the drifters' influence works thematically in the story department, it doesn't do much to change how much else in the design department. Just butchered my own words there, but we're gonna keep going. Dwarves are short and gruff looking, elves are pretty to look at, the nobles dressed like, dickheads, and the world is very uninteresting everywhere else, but I can't help but think that is a deliberate decision. But making the setting and its characters more generic looking, it makes the main focus of the drifters stand out more. They don't blend in due to the different how different their aesthetic is, and how they stand out more because they are the focus. Especially when they introduce set pieces like the airplanes and the Hiryu, a famous World War II aircraft carrier. Things that doesn't belong in a world like this, and I think that's why it works, and why it is necessary to have such a bland background for these other things to stand out more. I can criticize it as much as I want, but complaining about why the world is bland would be like me complaining about Dun-Dun-Dun's weird obsession with male genitals. It's fucking pointless to complain about something so fundamental to the story. And yes, I am saying Ken being under constant threat of castration is important to the story. Also, Dan Dardan, read it. It's a really just good action manga, although I do think it does peter out after a little while, but I still think you should read it, especially if you like campy yet mature stories like, Chainsaw Man and that one I can't think about right now, Jujutsu Kaisen? I think that's it. Anyway, okay, enough about testicles. Let's talk about more interesting implications, of drifters, stuff like the conflict between the drifters, the symbolism of the eyes, and more importantly, the possibility of Hitler being good. So, a really big weird point for me with the story is Hitler, or rather, how it depicts Hitler. I feel like I need to preface this paragraph of my stance on this. I may be half German, but I don't support Nazis. I don't like their political philosophy, and I still think Hitler is a horrible person. With that said, I think I can understand why Hitler is adrift in this manga. To explain why, I probably need to explain a little something here for those who are uninformed and knows that this part will be spoiled. So, honestly, if you don't want to be spoiled on anything, I think I just recommend skipping this whole section and just jump to the conclusion. I think it's better for you that way. Drifters are split into two groups within the lore of this world. Drifters tend to be good ones, while the ones who side with totally not Jesus are called ends or offscourge, depending on the translation. Here's the thing, drifters aren't 100% good. They are depicted to be ambiguous in their ambitions. Take, for example, our main trio. They don't really want to fight the Black King, it just happens their personal goals align with the October's goals, and that's why they are viewed as drifters. All Oda wants is to have his empire again. Toyohisa wants to die an honorable death in battle, and, I don't know exactly what Femboy here wants. The point is, drifters aren't universally good. It just depends on how their actions are viewed. And I think that's what Hitler implies. To the humans of this world, of course, he would be a drifter since he helped their empire expand fast and capture a lot of territory and influence. He fits into the definition of a drifter by this world's standards. To us, the reader, we can see his past and go see past that alone and see that he was just a horrible dictator who got away with applying his same horrible logic to this world unhindered. Hitler serves as a blatant example of drifters aren't being universally good for those who haven't caught on yet, although I think the manga doesn't do a good job of explaining that either. I mean, it took me several reads and months of sitting on it to finally get it. And while I can be extremely thick-headed, I understand the theme of drifters not being good when Oda started showing signs of his bigger ambitions. Overall, Hitler is kinda justified. Oh god, that's a sentence that's going to get taken into context. But it seems to take more serious interpretation to reach some form of, well, reasonable conclusion with his inclusion. I mean, it could just be the manga trying to justify the actions of the Order Empire by saying Hitler was their founder, hate them, and therefore justify the mass murdering of Nazis again for the second time in his works. But that's too shallow and not an interesting explanation, despite being the more reasonable option. Okay, now with the explanation of why Hitler is what made out as a drifter is done, we can talk about symbolism, the less controversial subject. Okay, so it's 4 a.m. and I honestly don't want to edit these next two parts, and I'm not gonna lie, I felt like they were irrelevant to the conversation anyway. I'll probably upload them as deleted scenes, especially because I had this one about going into the Octobers and their possible origins, which I thought was interesting, so I might save that, maybe retool it into a deleted scene, just a little mini essay, who knows. I'm just want to get this video done at this point, so we're just going to move on to Jesus, okay? Back to pre-recorded me. Okay, let's end this segment with the importance of the Black King being Jesus. I said I was going to discuss this, so why not end this segment about deeper meaning than discussing how Jesus being the main antagonist, has some serious implications. I'm going to hit this with another disclaimer because I feel like the one topic more touchy than neo-Nazism is religious talk, specifically interpretations of religious figures in media. I know some people don't like seeing their gods slash important figures being depicted out of character in fictional media, especially if they're depicted as villains, and I respect that. But by the same logic, I feel like we should respect other characters or people's depictions of said gods slash figures, especially if it's not harmful. I think making Jesus the main antagonist is a non-harmful choice, but if you think it's harmful, the best idea I think you could do is, well, I just suggest you don't read this manga. Okay, now with the second disclaimer of the video done now, let's talk about the main topic. What I like about having Jesus being the main antagonist is twofold. It gives the Ents and the monsters more humanity in a way, and allows them to be a good storytelling, although there's something a little fuzzy on here. Focusing on the first point, I think Jesus being the leader of the monsters really sells the point of mankind being the real monsters. I mean, the humans and the humanoid surfaces are being, well, effectively infighting for decades during this point of the story. And while that has been happening, he has been uniting the monsters to become a force to exterminate them. While also doing this, he's helping those monsters become more human-like by helping them establish a natural city, complete with all the human comforts, including butchers. I don't really have much else to say on this, since I feel like this contributes more to my second point. But the fact the story makes sure you see this transformation in the monster's social construct is what makes it stand out, and really shines a light on how monstrous the humans of this world have become. So my second point is about storytelling, and I think Jesus being the main bad guy makes for very interesting storytelling. Like, we're talking about the guy who died on the cross, or stake if you're a Jehovah Witness, for our sins, or something like that. I didn't really pay attention in church. So to have him, the Messiah of man, turn against the very thing he sacrificed himself for is inherently interesting. A villain who has sacrificed his everything only to have it go unappreciated makes a well good sympathetic villain. So on the surface, Jesus is a sympathetic villain who sees how humanity has taken his sacrifice in vain and continues to sin. Gives him a good motivation to side the monsters, but what if I could take this one more step further for you? What if it's possible for this to be a scheme by him to reunite humanity and have them overcome their sin again? I'm not going to elaborate it on here since the segment is very drawn out already, so I'll save it for a possible future mini essay. Who knows? But let's let's sit on it for now. What I really want to quickly discuss is the implications of God not existing. That was a segue and a half, but keeping it brief again, because yet again this segment is very drawn out already. As we see in the manga, there's two people in charge of the drifters. Miyazaki, who's in charge of the actual drifters, and Easy, who's in charge of the ends. Jesus is an end, but he's the son of God, but for Jesus to be in this universe within this context, this means either the people in that hallway are either interpretations of Christianity's God, which I doubt, or God never existed. I'm just going to leave it there because I'm the least qualified person to talk about religion as someone who tries their best to avoid it. There's so much other stuff I want to bring up, but frankly, this part is dragging on too long. Hitler took up too much room, so I would like to do a follow-up to other takeaways to Drifters. Let me know if there's down below if there's, well, any interest in this, and if there is, well, I'll consider it. Anyway, let's quickly talk about the anime. While I'm not usually one to sit down and watch anime as I prefer to read, Drift is one of the few animes I still watch, and one of the fewer animes I own physically. No, really, I have the Blu-ray Special Edition, although the actual Blu-ray eludes me, so all I got is this box full of cheap knickknacks. Probably wasn't worth the $80 I spent on it, but now I'm getting off topic. The anime currently only has one season, consisting of 12 episodes, which only really covers the first 50 chapters, which doesn't seem much, but seeing the manga is sitting around 80 chapters at the time of writing, the anime is pretty much up to date for a 2016 title. I should also probably add there's like 3 different OVAs since that first season, which continues the storyline of the manga, which the latest release being in 2018. So yeah, the anime is that recent, which is surprising because it doesn't really look that good. Yeah, I know that came out of blue, but frankly, I think that anime doesn't do the series justice. It does try to replicate the manga, and I feel like it fails at doing that, or should I rather say, it exceeds at doing what it wanted to do. Yeah, it looks one-to-one with the manga, but if I was comparing it to its sister series, Hellsing Ultimate, that's where my complaint comes in. For me, when adapting a manga, or any form of visual novel to an animated format, there needs to be a way to justify it. Most of the time, I'm normally satisfied by seeing my favourite characters animated and being voiced by my favourite VAs, but for Drifters, I want the anime to elevate the experience. Sounds unreasonable, but when compared to Hellsing, I feel like I can justify it. Hellsing in manga form is a very good read with a lot of good visuals, so when they brought us the anime, they approved on it. Wait, that's the wrong example, editor. The original Hellsing anime is a completely different beast and is non-canon. Yeah, we want Hellsing Ultimate, thank you. Here's the thing, Hellsing Ultimate took the visuals of that series and made it better. It didn't seek to recreate, but to improve on the base, and made, in my opinion, a timeless visual masterpiece. I do feel like it's an unreasonable request, though, to considering Hellsing Ultimate probably had more budget and a bigger fan base to profitize from, considering how old the source material was. But I feel like the comparison is valid. Drifters probably will never look as good as its sibling, but there's actually some other good stuff in the anime too. I did say earlier that an adaptation needs a good way of justifying its existence, and while its art direction may not be it, it's carried by the one thing I cared about. Well, the one other thing I cared about, which is gore. The manga is known for his series being made for mature audiences, and because of it, they didn't cheap out on it. There's massive blood skirts, decapitations, bodies burning to crisps, and a lot of sheer brutality. It does what a good anime should do, which is use animation to amplify certain elements of the source material, which happens to be, in this case, the gore. In fact, the animation really actually made some of the scenes more horrifying to witness. The best example of this is early on, when Toyohisa takes on the Order Regiment that's attacking the elves, and is about to take down their captain. In the manga, it's a very violent moment, but one that I have certainly become desensitized to, so I never felt anything from it, but in the anime, it becomes gut-wrenching and almost intolerable to watch. To witness just Toyohisa mercilessly beating this man's face in with the butt of his sheath, while he cries out for mercy, is mortifying. It really just tells how monstrous our protagonist is, and the moment is really sold by the audio as well. The VA certainly sells how brutal the moment is, but what also helps is the sound effects and the soundtrack, how the soundtrack almost dulls down to an almost near silence, just so you can hear every audible thump and crunch. Really just sells the scene. It's an unforgettable moment for the series, that's for sure, but that scene really says it all when it comes to sound effects and the soundtrack. I feel like that example I used says a lot about how good the sound direction is when it comes to the anime. There isn't much else to say since I'm not really a music guy, but I do feel like there's something to talk about with the soundtrack being, well, kind of generic. I mean, a good soundtrack is one that does its job, so seeing I didn't really notice it until I forced myself to try to hear it means it was doing a good job. But when I did force myself to listen, it's very bland. A lot of the score is very samey, which all comes to this genre, which I want to call jivey rock. Not the best description, but that's the best way to put it, and that's how I certainly feel about it. It's samey and uninspired. It does its job, and that's all that matters. What stands out to me, though, is the intro and the outro soundtracks, which is, well, standard for any anime. You can't have a forgettable intro, because if it's forgettable, then the entire series is forgettable. But that said, I love this intro to bits. The animation alone makes it stand out, but really what makes it is the music. The song is called Gospel of Throttle, and probably one of my favourite anime openings ever. I mean, it doesn't hold a candle to Wildside Flashback or even the 4Kids One Piece opening. The Gospel Throttle is, well, a solid opening for the series like this. I would recommend checking out the full song, and if you like it, give the band a listen. Their name is Minutes Till Midnight, and they have a lot of good music. I personally recommend 110% as another song to listen to, and while you're at it, Going Out Fighting is also a great song. But, I'm getting off topic now, so let's rein it back in. There isn't much else to list, since I feel like there's enough said here, but two more things worth mentioning is how okay the VA is. Like, okay, this only really applies to the English voice acting. It really never stood out to me. The Japanese dub is also close to the same experience, except for one standout, which is Yoichi. In the English dub, it's very easy to tell that he's a young male, but with the Japanese dub for him, well, it does it so well. It sells the line between girly male to actual femininity so well, I actually had to double check with one of my friends that I wasn't the only one getting feminine undertones from. I don't know why I keep saying undertones. It's undertones. Anyway, the other thing I want to point out is how sucky the human moments are. I don't like them in the manga. I didn't like them in Hellsing, and I don't like them here. The series already has a good way of displaying humor without having to downgrade the quality of the art. So this felt unnecessary. I rather like it more when it's using it for its own makes because those parts felt more disconnected and more funny by design. Okay, enough whining. Let's just whine. Just wrap up this mess of a review and my English vocabulary. This video has been a hot mess, but it's hard to convey my feelings for this series without it being a hot mess. It also lacks any real notable criticism, which I'm gonna blame it on my blind love for the series. Which, just like how I'm gonna blame it for making my script a hot mess, and maybe even my English skills, I don't know, I've been sitting here in 26-degree heat. It's not very comfortable recording conditions. I love this series, but not enough to nitpick it. If this was One Piece, I would nitpick it to hell and back, because I truly love that series. But Drifters, I love its concept, and how it does that concept justice. But I don't love it enough to actually voice proper criticisms. It's like it's sitting in the middle ground between being amazing and being shit. But then calling it serviceable is an insult. Being serviceable is an insult only you are throwing at mediocre Izaki titles. But Drifters isn't that. I just don't know how to sum this up. Okay, let's make this easy to break down with a very simple yes-no questions. Is Drifters good? Yes. Is Drifters a must-read? Maybe? Well, that failed, but seriously, I don't know how to recommend this series. Like, with Hellsing, I can say, if you like over-the-top gore and mass-murdering Nazis, you will love Hellsing, but Drifters is such a good all-rounder. I wouldn't even consider it a must-watch or even a must-read, since there's a holy trifecta for that respectively, but, like, if you like Kazaki's, you will like Drifters. If you like the previous works of the authors, you will love this. If you like historical manga, you will like this. There's so many aspects about it that I can point at and say you will like Drifters if you're into X. I'm going to stick with my original score that I gave this series all the way back in 2018, which is 8 out of 10. This applies to both the manga and the anime, because while the anime maybe does a higher quality version of the source material like it should be, I already discussed where it failed. God, for a first time review for such a big title, this was such a dumpster fire. I feel like I also explained why I think Drifters is how you do an Izaki title properly, but that's a whole other thing, so I'm gonna save it for a video essay topic. I feel like exploring why the Izaki genre had a massive spike in popularity in the past decade would be a better suited time to explore how Izakis can be done better. Anyway, it's time for our next topics. So, for my next review, next time we're covering another small series while I sort out my plans for my next big video. Anyway, if you want to support me in this endeavor, consider subscribing and joining the Patreon. Your support helps me justify making questionable opinion-based videos for the masses, so why not show me that you support the agenda so I can feel like I should keep going on. And also maybe justify me maintaining the Patreon, because I haven't touched it in ages. It's just like, well, no one's using it right now, might as well not bother. But yeah, anyway. You know what? If you're still sitting on the edge about supporting me, I will review Hellsing sometime this year. I mean, I say sometime, it's most likely going to be my October project, and there's definitely something that would fit into Halloween for me. But yeah, I'm going to review the whole thing. The original series, both animes, the Bridge series, and the OVA, which is Hellsing the Dawn. Yeah, I will do it because that series is a trip, but not now. Now, excuse me, but there's a gag manga that needs to be reviewed, and that's Crypt Run Fight itself, so I'll see you next time.